Welcome, everybody. Today I'm recording a little kind of bonus video. It's not directly related to our Unit 7 content, so we are going to go into that material. But it talks about the usage of databases basically in ways that we haven't been using them yet. Right now, when we go to code, we have in the background MySQL is running as a service on Windows, so it's running on my own machine. And then I use MySQL Workbench, which allows me to connect to that database on my own machine and interact with it and write code for it and store data inside of it. That is actually a very atypical way to work with databases. All right, so what I mean by that is when you're working professionally with a database, the database will usually reside on a server somewhere, right? So you have some machine that's not on your computer, and it might be out in the cloud somewhere, or it might be on a different computer, in your organization, or probably loaded up on a server sitting in a rack like we have across the hall here. We have some servers. And then the ones that I'm going to demonstrate today, which will be probably a little more interesting for my web software students, is the fact that web students, when they get further along in their program, start to work with backend database systems that are loaded up on our Prometheus web server. Our Prometheus web server, and I should probably do this in a separate tab. So for my web students, we run this web server, and this is our silly little homepage. It doesn't go anywhere, but this is the server that the students get to publish their work on. So like when they turn in their homework, they upload it here and their pages can be viewed on the internet, right? Helpful for web developers. When you start to create more robust applications for the web, so like you learn how to write code, and then you can create a web page that looks nice, but eventually you get to the point where you need a web page that does something. Like, so if you go to it and log in, it remembers who you are. And if you're storing stuff or uploading things or whatever, where does that stuff go? Well, here's the answer. It goes into a database. The logins go into a database. Your passwords are stored in the database. The stuff you create or upload gets stored in a database. And when web developers learn how to interact with the database, they typically use this piece of software. This is pretty interesting. Now, conceptualize this. Right now, we're working on our systems where the database core software is running in the background, once again, as a service in Windows. And then we use MySQL Workbench to connect to it. On our Prometheus web server, we have MySQL running as a database in the background on the server. And when you want to interact with it, you can do it a number of different ways. The way that web developers do it most often is instead of using MySQL Workbench, they use this web-based interface called PHPMyAdmin. Now, why they call it that? Well, it's written in PHP, which is a programming language for the web. You can, depending on what level of access you have to the database system, I happen to have root level access. You can see my root password and stuff, and user account are kind of preloaded. But really, when we get into this environment, what we see is a database management system, which you can think of loosely as being related to MySQL Workbench. So this is a web-based interface. Now, I do have root level access. So I'm like the admin, or one of the admins on the server. And in the left sidebar here, you see all these like entries. These are all individual databases held by our students, right? So like people who are in the program actively, their databases are available here. And there's probably many, many pages of these if I were to scroll through them. We have a lot of different users on our system, right? And you can see here as I kind of scroll through the databases. There's 151 total databases on the system right now. Kind of mind-boggling, right? Like, oh, so this database can load more than one database. Yes, that's what database servers do. They load a lot of different databases. And what happens is, and I'm trying to see if I can find an example of it here. some setting must have changed here. But I want you to notice, for example, this A account, these are all databases related to one of my utility accounts. And what I use these for sometimes is for programming classes that interface with databases. So we do that in our Java classes in the web program. But then we also use that in some of our advanced programming classes. So if you do like advanced Python, for example, you'll interface with remote databases. Or if you spin up a website that's operating on top of WordPress, that requires a database on the back end to operate the whole website. So for web developers, when they're working on these database systems, they often, this is kind of the go-to tool when you're doing web work. Why? When you work on web hosting platforms, this piece of software is loaded on almost every web hosting platform. It's kind of the standard, right? You can do stuff in these databases, and I'm just kind of clicking on one of them here to see if I can see if there's even any content inside of them, and maybe not. All right, there we go. Here's an example. And notice we do have like a schema window sort of on the left, like we do in MySQL Workbench. And then I clicked on one of the tables and it displays it on the screen. And not only that, but I can go in here and I can actually run code or do actions on this database graphically, you know, little clicks and check marks and stuff like that. But it also gives you the ability to write straight SQL code if you wish. And it even has a pretty slick tool that allows you, for example, to concoct statements, you know, pretty quickly. And you can, you know, you notice I'm just hitting the insert button and it's throwing all this stuff up on the screen. So it has some automated tools to help you write your queries. But basically in this window here, any of the type of queries that we would write in MySQL Workbench would also work here. Now, do web developers usually write SQL code right in this environment? Not often, right? Usually we'll write it in the programming language that interfaces with it, or if we're using a content management system that's got those tools built in, really all you're doing is setting up a name for the database and maybe a password, and then the software does the rest, right? But the fact that we have this available, that we can, you know, use this, and this is out on the internet. So I could, for example, from MySQL Workbench, and I might have, and I'm trying to see if I do have a panel set up here. Notice that this panel is set up to connect to the Prometheus database on the particular port that MySQL operates on. I know that the text is kind of small here in the classroom, but when I do the connection to this database, I want you to conceptualize this. The machine that holds this database is sitting in Sturtevant across the county, right? And so when I hit this panel and I type in my password, oh my gosh, I don't remember what the password is. Anyhow, right? Because I usually let it autofill. Maybe I can, this is kind of a silly little way to do it. I don't know if I can copy paste it from here. Let's see. Maybe. Yeah. All right. Okay. So it's not letting me connect. But if I had the right password in there, it would connect up, and then I could use MySQL Workbench to write code for it. And every time I run a query or put information into it or retrieve information, it's traveling across the internet to get to it. That's the more normal way to work with a database, right? Even internally in an organization. So you can use tools like PHPMyAdmin if you're a web developer or somebody who has access to a web-based database system. You can use MySQL Workbench. In fact, what you learn is that there's other pieces of software that can do the same thing. You don't have to use MySQL Workbench. It's just kind of the more popular one. And then there's also the ability, and this is the part where I'm not sure this connection will work. We'll see. But you can use okay, I thought I had it loaded up on my system here. You can use a terminal program to connect to your database from the command line, which is kind of maybe a little bit deeper dive for some people. And I'm just trying to remember where I might have this tool on my system. Oh. And what I'm doing right now is connecting to our server with a command prompt. So I'm doing this on kind of a primitive level here, and I'm trying to like bump up the font size, but I don't think I can. So we'll see what happens here. I'm going to log in with one of my utility accounts. Hopefully I got the password right. All right. And I didn't. All right. So I want to do a demo with this, but I'm not remembering my passwords at the moment. So it makes for a very uninteresting demo. But the point is, I can log into the server from a command line and then connect to the database server and run everything in this primitive looking interface. And guess what? It works exactly the same. I can do all the same database work from a command line. And in fact, when I first learned how to do this stuff, that's how we had to do it. There was no other option, right? You would write all your SQL code at the command prompt. You would get your output at the command prompt. And then if you were lucky, you could save it to a file and print it. That was kind of like the grand output. But all the concepts were the same, right? We were still connecting to a database system. Who knows where it was? We were still writing the same code. And we were still storing the information, even if it didn't look as pretty or fancy as the stuff we're doing now. So I think that's kind of fascinating. Maybe I'll leave this screen open and figure out my passwords later, and then I can, augment this recording. But let's just leave it at that. So that's just an example of working with databases remotely. And what's, I think, really kind of important to know is the fact that you can remote connect to databases from within this interface. And, I'm going to give it one last try here because I think I could pull up my password manager here on the other screen and see if I can figure out the password. So like you guys aren't seeing this right now, but I'm trying to get logged in. And I have so many different accounts on it. Here we go. Here's the root account. So let's see if I can copy this and make it run. So I know I tried this before and I had the wrong password in there, and now it's connecting. So this connection that you see spinning up now on the screen, and I want you to notice, the schema table, how robust it is, right? Like we're working with like 2 or 3 databases with a couple of tables each. And here are all the databases on that server. And I'm just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. It's crazy, right? Like how many are out there. But once again, this information is sitting on a server literally across the county. This particular one that I'm clicking on right now is a database for a WordPress installation, WordPress being a web content management system that students eventually get to work on. Right now, and I'm doing like a really weird thing here, right? So this is like kind of hackery stuff, but I want you to notice I'm clicking into the user table of my WordPress database, and I want you to notice that my login and my password are stored here in a hash, right? So that's not the actual password, it's encrypted, but that's the kind of stuff you store, right? Think about that, like, the capability here, folks. This is pretty powerful stuff. All right, that's the end of my little demo. So this video will end here.